Modern warfare began with a breach of the natural order. Long before the pressure tanks of the 20th century, the weapon was a cultural nightmare, a violation of every unspoken convention of combat. It started with the mechanics of the siphon. 7th century engineers utilized hand-pumped bellows to create internal pressure. They forced a volatile liquid through bronze tubes. This was the Greek fire. On the waves of the Mediterranean, it functioned as a primitive, ship-mounted flamethrower. Was the terror purely physical? No. It was the psychological collapse of the sailors. Water did not extinguish the flame. It fueled it. Chemical analysis suggests a combustion temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius. This matches the thermal intensity of modern napalm. The Byzantine Empire guarded the secret for centuries. They treated the formula as a state asset. If a chemist spoke, he died. If a siphon fell into enemy hands, it was useless without the mixture. To this day, the exact composition remains unknown. 30 years after the dawn of industrial war, portable tanks would turn German infantrymen into living torches. But the concept of controlled projected ruin was perfected a millennium earlier. The recipe for Greek fire vanished with the fall of Constantinople. By the spring of 1915, Byzantine technology found a lethal second life in the German trenches of Verdun. The stalemate of the Great War demanded a new category of terror. The Flammenwerfer was not a weapon of precision. It was an industrial nightmare. Why deploy a weapon with a range of only 20 meters? Because its purpose was not to kill every soldier, but to break the mind of those who remained. German pioneer assault units began specialized training. They operated in 2 tiers. The first was a static monster, a crew-served system holding hundreds of liters of fuel. The second was the portable cleef, a backpack unit for a single soldier. It carried 20 liters of pressurized flammable liquid. This provided only 20 seconds of continuous fire. The mechanics were simple: a cylinder, a hose, a nozzle with an igniter at the tip. 20 liters of fuel burned faster than a soldier could reload his Mauser. Before dawn at Verdun, the French lines were silent. The Germans crawled through the mud of no man's land. They reached the edge of the parapet. Then, the silence broke. A distinct, high-pitched hissing sound signaled the release of the mixture before the spark. A jet of orange liquid engulfed the narrow trench. Fire filled the confined space. In theory, the flamethrower was a tactical tool for clearing bunkers. In reality, it was a psychological hammer. The contrast was immediate. High command expected a weapon of mass slaughter. Instead, they found a tool of pure panic. The sight of a human being turned into a living torch was more effective than any artillery barrage. Soldiers did not wait to be hit. At the first hiss of the nozzle, French infantry abandoned their positions. They broke. They ran. As soon as the operator appeared, the line collapsed. The horror of Verdun forced the British command to find an answer. Mobilized German pioneers had redefined the limit of terror. At Ypres, near the ruins of Hooge, the pattern repeated. 500 casualties in 2 hours. 1 brigade nearly annihilated. German sappers crawled through the night to the edge of the Allied trenches. At dawn, the hiss of pressurized fuel preceded the roar. Grenadiers followed the fire, clearing dugouts with explosives. The line collapsed into a state of pure primal panic. How does an empire respond to a weapon that turns men into ash? London rejected the German model of mobility. They chose the scale of industrial engineering. William Livens designed a monster, the Large Gallery Flame Projector. It weighed 2.5 tons. Engineers disassembled the machine and carried the parts into secret tunnels. They dug these galleries deep under no man's land, inches away from the enemy. Men bolted the steel sections together in total darkness, smelling the damp earth and the heavy scent of fuel. The Somme offensive became the proving ground. July 1st, 1916. 2 projectors opened fire. A stream of liquid fire surged across 100 meters of scorched earth. It was a massive, pressurized arc of death visible for miles. The British infantry moved in through the smoke. They found charred remains in the forward positions. The few Germans who lived offered no resistance. They dropped their rifles. The survivors surrendered in total silence. Static giants like the Lieben's projector offered relative safety compared to the portable units. The backpack models transformed the operator into a walking bomb. Strapping 40 liters of fuel to a soldier's spine invited catastrophe. Weight restricted movement. Range rarely exceeded 25 meters. The tactical gain did not match the personal risk. Visibility was the primary killer. A flamethrower team was more vulnerable than a machine gun crew. The first burst of fire acted as a beacon for every rifleman and artillery observer in the sector. Snipers targeted the tanks. A single bullet could turn the operator into a human torch. Accidents occurred with mathematical regularity. German teams often split the load. One man carried the fuel, the other the nozzle. In one documented engagement, a British soldier witnessed a fuel carrier collapse from a gunshot. The falling weight wrenched the hose from the operator's grip. The pressurized nozzle whipped wildly. It incinerated the surrounding German squad in seconds. The weapon was temperamental. Wind was a constant threat. During one assault, a sudden gust caught the flame mid-air. The fire stream folded back. It engulfed the entire German unit before they could drop the gear. Capture was not an option. Flame operators shared the status of snipers and spies. They were hated by both sides. If the fuel tank didn't explode, the enemy ensured a swift, brutal end. Summary execution on the spot was the most merciful outcome. The psychological and physical costs proved too high for the era's technology. Infantry flamethrowers remained niche assault tools with stalled development. Major powers halted the evolution of portable flame weapons throughout the interwar period. While the West neglected flame weapons during the interwar years, Berlin chose a different path. The Wehrmacht integrated fire into the very heart of Blitzkrieg. They did not just carry flamethrowers, they armored them. The Flammenwerfer III entered the field. Engineers stripped the standard Panzer III of its main gun. In its place, they mounted a flame projector. It was a specialized siege engine designed to incinerate Soviet bunkers on the Eastern Front. However, the tank's mechanical complexity limited its reach. Use was sporadic. Deployment was inconsistent. Why did the Allies suddenly shift focus to flame tanks? The reason was not tactical superiority, but survival. Foot operators of the M2 flamethrower died at staggering rates. They were slow. They were visible. They were priority targets for every Japanese sniper in the Pacific. American engineers faced a crisis of efficiency. Standard gasoline was too thin. It sprayed like water, bouncing off stone and dissipating in the air. To protect their men, the chemists needed the fire to stick. They began experimenting with fuel consistency. By mixing gasoline and diesel with a specialized thickening agent, they altered the liquid's molecular behavior. This was not a weapon of precision, it was a chemical solution to a ballistic problem. The resulting mixture did not just splash, it adhered to vertical concrete and seeped into the deepest ventilation shafts. It flowed like lava and burned with a persistent, suffocating heat. Through this pursuit of adhesive lethality, the laboratory at Harvard University finalized the formula for napalm. The Pacific Theater redefined the architecture of death. Japanese engineers built pillboxes and deep tunnel networks to withstand naval bombardments of 16-inch shells. Internal layouts followed a strict zigzag pattern. Every chamber acted as a blast shield. If a Marine tossed a grenade inside, the explosion remained localized. Specialized floor vents, or grenade trenches, allowed defenders to kick explosives away before they detonated. A room lost to a blast could be reoccupied in seconds. Physical barriers stopped shrapnel. They could not stop physics. Napalm changed the mechanics of the assault. A stream of thickened fuel hits the bunker's narrow aperture. The mixture clings to the concrete and flows inward like liquid sun. Inside the confined space, the fire acts as a vacuum. It consumes every liter of oxygen in heartbeats. The air temperature spikes far beyond the boiling point of water. A soldier inside doesn't need to touch the flame. He breathes. The superheated air sears the respiratory tract instantly. The biological response is violent. Capillaries in the lungs burst. Fluid floods the air sacs. This is pulmonary edema. Within minutes, the victim's own body mimics the effects of phosgene or mustard gas from the Great War. The clinical cause of death was rarely a burn. It was drowning in one's own internal fluids. Military medical reports offered a comforting narrative. They described flamethrower death as instantaneous. Scientists claimed the sudden thermal shock triggered an immediate loss of consciousness. According to their data, the victim felt nothing. The footage from the Pacific tells a different story. Reality lacks the mercy of a bureaucratic report. In these documents, physicians use the term painful shock as a clinical euphemism for agonizing immediate trauma. The theory of a painless end collapsed against the visual evidence of the aftermath. The physics of the bunker was simple. Fire consumed every liter of oxygen in seconds. Carbon monoxide replaced the air. If the heat did not kill the soldier, the vacuum did. Zigzag trenches and grenade sumps offered no protection against suffocation. Survivors faced a binary choice. They could stay and endure the mechanical failure of their own lungs. Instead, Japanese soldiers broke cover and ran directly into machine gun fire. While Japanese soldiers suffocated in the depths of their bunkers, American flamethrower operators faced a different mathematical certainty. The battlefield of Iwo Jima transformed the infantrymen into a high-priority target. A massive steel silhouette of fuel tanks rose behind the soldier's head. It was a beacon for every sniper on the island. How long did a flamethrower operator survive in combat? Statistics from Iwo Jima provided a precise answer: 4 minutes. This was the duration of a standard phonograph record. For the operator, it was the entire span of his remaining life. To engage, he had to crawl within 30 yards of a concrete pillbox. He carried 30 seconds of fire in his tanks. The operator squeezed the trigger. A roar of napalm filled the air. Then the pressure dropped. The tanks went dry. He stood alone in the sand, holding only a standard-issue pistol against an entrenched enemy. If the weapon malfunctioned, the mixture coated the operator instead of the target. Capture meant a slow death. The Japanese reserved a specific brutality for those who carried the fire. The solution required heavy armor and massive displacement. During the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the United States Army deployed the Sherman Zippo. These tanks replaced infantry vulnerability with half-inch steel plating. The range jumped from 30 yards to 100. On the move, these machines operated as mobile furnaces, purging entire ridgelines without pause. By the end of the campaign, the logistical scale shifted from man-portable canisters to industrial-level incineration. The Sherman Zippo units consumed tens of thousands of gallons of fuel mixture. While American Shermans incinerated the caves of Okinawa, the British in Europe transformed psychological dread into a calculated tactical doctrine. The Churchill crocodile became the primary instrument of this policy. Engineers removed the hull machine gun to install a flame projector. The tank did not carry fuel inside the hull. Instead, it towed an armored trailer containing 400 gallons of thickened fuel. This trailer looked like a slow-moving bomb. It connected to the tank via a complex articulated joint. The system used nitrogen pressure to hurl fire at a range of 120 yards. This exceeded the reach of any man-portable unit. In the bocage of Normandy, the mere sight of a crocodile often ended the battle. German defenders frequently surrendered before the first burst. They preferred captivity to the certainty of being cooked alive. The terror of liquid fire was not confined to the Western Front. During the Battle of Stalingrad, Soviet engineers deployed static flamethrower booby traps. They buried these devices in the rubble of shattered factories. A single tripwire activated the charge. One German soldier's footstep triggered a vertical wall of flame. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The Wehrmacht responded with its own static defense, the Abwehr Flammenwerfer 42. These were 7-gallon tanks buried in the earth around key buildings. One trigger covered an area of 30 yards with fire for 1.5 seconds. It was a weapon of desperation designed to break infantry rushes. These stationary traps proved that fire had moved beyond a specialized tool. Command began to consider shifting the delivery method from the ground to the sky. Ground-level fire had its limits. Tanks and portable units cleared bunkers, but engineers sought a weapon to erase entire square kilometers. The solution moved from the mud of the trenches to the stratosphere. In the Pacific, P-47 Thunderbolts began dropping improvised belly tanks filled with napalm. The results were immediate. Efficiency dictated a shift from individual targets to collective destruction. The B-29 Superfortress became the primary delivery system for this new doctrine. The target was no longer the Japanese army, but the Japanese city. Why was Tokyo chosen as the primary laboratory for fire? The answer lay in the city's anatomy. Traditional Japanese architecture relied on wood and paper. Population density reached 103,000 people per square mile. This was higher than any Western metropolis. The city was not a collection of buildings, but a massive pile of kindling. The M69 cluster bomb was the chosen tool. The process was mechanical. A B-29 released the cluster casing. At 5,000 feet, the casing burst. 38 individual bomblets scattered, trailing long cheesecloth streamers to stabilize their descent. Upon impact, a timed fuse ignited a magnesium charge. This threw globs of thickened gasoline 40 feet in all directions. On the night of March 9, 1945, Operation Meeting House began. 300 B-29s arrived over Tokyo. They dropped 1,600 tons of incendiaries. The smell of burning pine and scorched paper enveloped the capital. Within minutes, individual fires merged into a single sentient firestorm. Oxygen vanished from the streets. The temperature reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. 100,000 people died in a single night. The technology of 1945 did not vanish. It mutated. By the time the Vietnam War ignited, the backpack flamethrower had evolved, and the Sherman's fire-spitting legacy passed to the M48. Engineers birthed the M67. Soldiers called it the Zippo. The conflict moved underground. In the Iron Triangle and Cu Chi, the Viet Cong built thousands of miles of tunnels. For the Americans, these were not just fortifications, they were psychological traps. Marine tunnel rats entered the dark with a flashlight and a .45 caliber pistol. But when the tunnels proved too complex, they brought the fire. Backpack units pumped thickened fuel into the narrow shafts. The flames consumed the oxygen instantly. It didn't matter if the occupants were guerrillas or civilians seeking cover. Suffocation was as certain as the burn. The war then shifted to the tree line. Heavy armor took over where men could not tread. The M113 armored personnel carrier received a conversion. A massive fuel tank replaced the troop benches. The diesel engine idled with a heavy rhythmic thrum before the weapon engaged. Then came the roar. A high-pressure stream of napalm could reach 100 meters. In the dense jungle, where firing ports remained invisible to the naked eye, the Zippo tanks simply erased the greenery. There was no hiding. The terror was not one-sided. The Viet Cong deployed Soviet and Chinese flamethrowers with lethal precision. During a night assault on a fortified marine position, the North Vietnamese crept through the tall grass in total silence. They didn't lead with bullets. They led with liquid fire. The Marines watched as the darkness exploded into a blinding orange wall. Terrified by the heat, the defenders broke cover and ran directly into the preset kill zones of mortar and machine gun fire. 340,000 tons. That is the weight of fire dropped from the Vietnamese sky. It exceeds the napalm tonnage used against Japan in World War II by a factor of 10. While tanks scorched the earth meter by meter, fighter jets turned the horizon into a liquid furnace. How did the North Vietnamese respond to such overwhelming heat? They moved closer. General Giap's forces perfected the grabbing the belt tactic. They clung to American units, fighting at distances where a whisper could be heard. They stayed so close that calling in air support meant risking suicide. In the dense canopy, the line between hunter and prey vanished. Gravity and physics rarely cooperate in a jungle. Heavy 500-pound canisters tumbled through the steam and emerald leaves. Pilots flew low. Visibility was near zero. A slight gust or a second's delay shifted the impact zone by hundreds of yards. Napalm behaved with a terrifying lack of precision. Often, the gel hit the very Americans who called for it. More often, it found the thatch roofs of nearby villages. Entire communities disappeared in seconds. The sticky substance did not just burn, it flowed through doorways and into bunkers. Local civilians faced a weapon that could not be extinguished with water. The United States military incinerated over 1,000 villages during the conflict. The searing images of burning villages reached television screens across the globe. For the first time, the public saw the true face of the chemical flame. The heat reached 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In evacuation hospitals, surgeons faced a biological nightmare. Medical staff attempted to remove combat uniforms, but the fabric had fused with human tissue. Synthetics, equipment, and skin melted into a single, inseparable mass. Doctors described these injuries as the most horrific in the history of warfare. A heavy, sweet stench of charred flesh filled the wards. It was a smell that veterans claimed stayed in their nostrils for decades. How did the world react to this chemical horror? Public outrage forced a radical shift in military doctrine. By the late 1970s, the United States Army officially retired the man-portable flamethrower from its inventory. The weapon of the trenches was deemed too inhumane for the modern age. In 1980, the international community codified this revulsion. The United Nations adopted Protocol 3. This document strictly prohibited the use of incendiary weapons against civilian populations or near forest cover. On paper, the era of the firebomber was over. Yet the military-industrial complex found a loophole. The ban targeted weapons designed primarily to set fires. It did not cover smoke screens. Commanders began deploying white phosphorus under the guise of battlefield illumination and masking. The chemical burns exactly like napalm, but legally it is a tactical tool. The signatures were dry on the protocol. The fire remained. Military chemists did not retreat after the 1980 ban. They adapted. To bypass Protocol 3, engineers replaced the liquid stream with a kinetic aerosol cloud. The goal remained unchanged, clearing fortified positions where shrapnel failed. How does a cloud become a hammer? It happens in milliseconds. A thermobaric warhead does not explode on impact in the traditional sense. First, a small charge bursts the casing open. It releases a fine spray of combustible fuel. This aerosol behaves like a gas. It flows around corners, it sinks into bunkers, it fills every crack in a cave system. The mixture hangs in the air, saturated with oxygen. Then, the second charge fires. A high explosive carries its own oxidizer, taking up half its weight. The thermobaric weapon is different. It uses the enemy's own air as the primary explosive component. Chemical engineers bypassed the Geneva restrictions by replacing liquid jets with an invisible aerosol. Napalm burned the skin. This mixture, bonding with the atmosphere, kills without leaving a single external mark. Conventional high explosives rely on a sharp, localized shock. They punch holes in steel and spray fragments. Thermobaric charges operate differently. They produce a sustained pressure pulse. The wave lasts longer. It does not just hit, it pushes. Does the target have cover? A concrete wall or a trench provides no safety. The pressure wave behaves like a fluid. It flows around corners. It enters ventilation shafts. It finds every cavity where a human might hide. Inside a bunker, the vacuum effect begins. Pressure spikes, then it drops instantly. A soldier in a deep tunnel feels the air being sucked out of his chest. This is not a physical blow, it is a biological collapse. Rapid pressure changes rupture the delicate alveoli in the lungs. The physics of the explosion turns into the physiology of dying. Fluid and air are forced into the bloodstream. Internal organs do not break, they burst. Capillaries in the eyes and brain shatter from the sheer atmospheric shift. If the blast wave fails, the environment itself becomes the weapon. The fireball consumes every molecule of oxygen within the cloud. Survivors are left in a vacuum filled with toxic carbon monoxide. They do not burn, they suffocate while their lungs fail to process the poisoned air. Handheld flamethrowers were tactical tools for clearing bunkers. Thermobaric systems are instruments of total physiological destruction. In open terrain, they are lethal. In enclosed spaces, the heat and pressure amplify to levels that liquid fuel could never reach. The shockwave bounces off walls, doubling the internal trauma. Soviet engineers took the physics of lung collapse and turned it into an industrial standard. While the West hesitated, Moscow redefined the flamethrower. They moved from liquid fuel to the cloud. The RPOA Schmel entered the inventory in the 1980s. It looked like a standard rocket launcher. It functioned like a portable vacuum bomb. One soldier could carry the destructive power of a heavy artillery shell. The Red Army didn't classify it as a rocket launcher. They called it a flamethrower. Did the name matter? Not to the targets. The Schmel proved its lethality in the mountains of Afghanistan. One shot cleared a cave system. Traditional explosives bounced off stone. The thermobaric cloud flowed around corners. It filled every crack before the spark. Then came the scaling. The TOS-1 Buratino took the Schmel's logic and multiplied it by 30. It is a heavy tank chassis carrying a rack of unguided thermobaric rockets. A single volley covers 40,000 square meters. The visual is a wall of fire. The pressure wave lasts long enough to crush concrete bunkers. Conventional high explosives create a sharp, brief peak. The TOS-1 creates a sustained furnace. In the Second Chechen War, these systems leveled urban blocks in minutes. International law struggled to keep pace. The Geneva Convention does not explicitly ban thermobaric weapons. They exist in a legal gray zone. Protocol 3 restricts incendiaries, but these are technically pressure weapons. Military doctrine demands restraint in populated areas. The reality of modern conflict ignores the suggestion. The weapon is designed for the city. It is designed for the bunker. The TOS-1 remains the most powerful non-nuclear weapon on the modern battlefield.